My friend, let me take you back over 2,500 years to a time when the mighty kingdoms of the world were clashing for power and ordinary lives were often turned upside down overnight. Among those lives was a young boy named Daniel, a boy who would grow into one of the most remarkable prophets of all time. Daniel was born in Judah, a land flowing with history, faith, and tradition. He grew up hearing stories of God's promises, of kings and prophets, and of a covenant that stretched beyond the generations. But Daniel's world was about to change forever. The Babylonians, under the fierce king Nebuchadnezzar, were expanding their empire, and Judah was no match for their might. Cities fell, the temple in Jerusalem was desecrated, and families were torn apart. Among those captured was Daniel. Imagine being a young boy, ripped from the familiar streets, the laughter of family, the smell of home, and thrust into a foreign land, surrounded by strangers speaking an unfamiliar tongue. It would have been terrifying for anyone, but Daniel's heart remained anchored in his faith. He did not let despair define him, and he chose early on to trust in the God he had always known. The Babylonians, recognizing Daniel's potential, selected him and other young men of noble blood to serve in the king's palace. They were taught the language and wisdom of Babylon, groomed to serve in positions of influence. Yet Daniel faced a challenge that tested the core of his identity. He was expected to adopt the customs, eat the food, and worship the gods of Babylon. Here, my friend, we see the first glimpse of Daniel's extraordinary resolve. He refused to defile himself. He asked for permission to eat only vegetables and drink water, honoring the dietary laws he had grown up with. The officials were skeptical. How could a young captive, weaker in body and seemingly inexperienced, thrive under such a strict regimen? Yet, Daniel's faith was not in question. And after a trial period, it became clear. Daniel and his friends were healthier and stronger than those who indulged in the king's lavish food. This early moment reveals something crucial about Daniel. He understood that faith is not merely a matter of belief, but of action. Even in exile, even under pressure, he would not compromise his integrity. And this courage and wisdom did not go unnoticed. Daniel's life in Babylon was filled with trials, yes, but also opportunities to grow, to shine, and to demonstrate the power of faith in everyday choices. As he matured, Daniel's wisdom and insight became legendary. Even in the early years, he possessed a gift for understanding visions, interpreting dreams, and discerning the mysteries that others could not grasp. These gifts would shape his destiny and prepare him for the extraordinary role he would play in God's plan, not just for his people, but for the world. But Daniel's story is not just about visions and miracles. It's about the heart. It's about a young man who chose courage over comfort, faith over fear, and purpose over passivity. Exile could have crushed him. The loss of his home, the uncertainty of his future, the power of a foreign king, all of these could have broken him. Yet Daniel's spirit remained unshaken. Even in the palace, amidst the splendor of Babylon, Daniel stayed true to his roots. He prayed faithfully, sought wisdom, and encouraged his friends to hold fast to their convictions. And God honored his faithfulness. Daniel's journey reminds us that even in the most challenging circumstances, integrity, courage, and trust in God can illuminate the darkest paths. So, my friend, as we begin to explore Daniel's remarkable life, remember this: the young boy in exile, standing firm with unwavering faith, is the same Daniel who would later face lions, interpret dreams for kings, and reveal visions of the end times. His story teaches us that our trials are not just obstacles, they are opportunities for God's power to shine through us. Daniel's early life in Babylon is more than history. It is a lesson in resilience, faith, and the quiet strength of a heart fully devoted to God. And as we continue, we'll see how this foundation prepared him for even greater challenges and remarkable prophecies that would shape generations to come. As Daniel grew in Babylon, he faced choices that could have made him bitter or broken. Every day reminded him of the home he had lost, the streets of Jerusalem, the temple where prayers once rose like incense, the faces of family and friends now separated from him. Yet instead of dwelling on what was gone, Daniel focused on what could be done. He sought wisdom. He observed the customs of Babylon carefully, and he learned the language and politics of the court, all while never compromising the principles he held dear. It's worth pausing here. Think about the courage it takes to live in exile, surrounded by a culture that is not your own, and still refuse to conform to its values when they conflict with your faith. Daniel's heart reminds us that integrity is not always loud or dramatic. It's often quiet, consistent, and firm in everyday choices. Choosing vegetables over the king's rich meals might seem small, but it was a declaration. I will not betray my God, even in what seems minor. Daniel wasn't alone. His 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, stood with him, and together, they became a small circle of unwavering faith in a vast, unfamiliar land. Their bond reminds us that faith is strengthened when shared, that courage is contagious, and that the decisions we make can inspire others even when no one is watching. Soon, Daniel's gifts began to stand out. The Babylonian officials noticed his intelligence, his calm demeanor, and his remarkable understanding. But it wasn't just knowledge that set him apart, it was character. Daniel's faith shaped his decisions, his honesty guided his actions, and his humility earned the respect of those around him. Even kings would later recognize this. In the years to come, Daniel would interpret dreams that no one else could, guide rulers through complex matters, and counsel kings with wisdom that could only come from God. Yet Daniel never let success or recognition change him. He remembered the God of his youth, who watched over him when he was a frightened boy in exile. He remembered the teachings of his ancestors, the prayers whispered in secret corners of Jerusalem, and the hope that one day, God's promises would unfold. And in remembering, he drew strength for the challenges ahead, challenges that would test him far beyond the simple choice of what to eat. Even as a young man, Daniel learned the first lessons that define a prophet: patience, courage, and unwavering trust in God's plan. He understood that being faithful didn't mean life would be easy. Trials would come, adversaries would arise, and danger would lurk. But faith meant holding fast, even when circumstances were uncertain, and trusting that God could use even exile, even captivity, even fear, for a greater purpose. The story of Daniel's early life is more than a historical account. It's a mirror for our own lives. How often do we face situations where compromise seems easier than courage? Where the world around us encourages shortcuts or moral bending? Daniel's example reminds us that faithfulness matters, not only in big, dramatic moments, but in quiet, everyday decisions that shape our character. Every choice, no matter how small, is an opportunity to honor God and grow in wisdom. By the time Daniel reached adulthood, he was fully equipped for the extraordinary life ahead. His mind was sharp, his spirit unwavering, and his heart devoted. Babylon was no longer just a place of exile. It became the training ground for his extraordinary destiny. Through the fiery challenges, the political intrigues, and the prophetic visions yet to come, Daniel's early years had prepared him to stand firm when the world demanded compromise, to speak truth when silence was safer, and to trust God when uncertainty surrounded him. And so, my friend, as we reflect on Daniel's early life, we see a pattern emerge, one that will echo throughout his story. Daniel was faithful when no one was watching. He was courageous when the odds were stacked against him. He was wise, humble, and steadfast, even as a boy in a strange land. These qualities would define not just his life, but the prophetic message he carried for generations to come. Exile had not broken him. Babylon could not shape him into someone he was not. And the challenges ahead, no matter how perilous, would be met with the same quiet strength that defined his earliest days. Daniel's life teaches us that adversity is not the enemy. It is the crucible in which character is forged, faith is tested, and purpose is revealed. So, as we close this chapter of Daniel's story, remember this: the young boy in Babylon is more than a figure of history. He is a living example of what it means to trust God, to remain steadfast, and to let faith guide every choice. His journey reminds us that no matter where life places us, far from home, surrounded by strangers, facing uncertainty, we can remain faithful, courageous, and wise. And when we do, God can use our lives in ways far beyond what we imagine. Imagine, my friend, being taken from your home as a teenager, placed in a foreign land with unfamiliar customs, strange foods, and powerful rulers who expect obedience without question. This was Daniel's life in Babylon. Already in exile, he had faced the pain of leaving Jerusalem and the uncertainty of a future in a strange empire. But even in this difficult situation, Daniel's faith remained unshaken. In Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar had a plan. He wanted the best and brightest young men of Judah to serve in his palace. They were to be trained for 3 years in the ways of the Babylonian court, taught language, literature, and even the king's customs. And as part of this training, they were to eat from the king's table, rich foods, wine, and delicacies that were likely forbidden by their dietary laws. Here's where Daniel's courage shines. He realized that eating the king's food could compromise his faith and defile his body. But refusing outright could bring anger or punishment. So Daniel approached a delicate solution, one that showed not only faith but wisdom. He requested that he and his 3 friends be allowed to eat only vegetables and drink water for 10 days, a simple test. The official in charge, worried about the boys' health and status, hesitated. Could these young captives survive without the rich foods and wine that nourished Babylonian youth? It seemed unlikely. Yet Daniel's heart was firm. He was determined to honor God, even in this small, daily choice. The 10-day test began. Daniel and his friends ate only vegetables, drank water, and prayed quietly for God's strength. Each day, the difference became apparent, not just in their outward appearance, but in their energy, clarity, and vitality. By the end of the period, they looked healthier and stronger than those who ate the king's luxurious food. The official was astonished. Daniel's faith had turned a seemingly minor act into a powerful testimony of God's care and provision. This moment is profound because it shows how faith often manifests in the ordinary, everyday decisions. Daniel could have conformed, gone along with the crowd, and simply eaten the king's food. But he chose to trust God in the details, proving that obedience in small things prepares us for greater challenges. During this time, Daniel and his friends also displayed remarkable wisdom and humility. They didn't demand special treatment. They presented their request respectfully, showing discernment and integrity. This balance of courage and humility is a lesson for all of us. Faith is not about stubbornness or rebellion. It's about standing for what is right while navigating life with wisdom and tact. As the years passed, Daniel's life in Babylon became a story of trust and perseverance. This early test with food was just the beginning. It foreshadowed the greater trials and divine assignments ahead, interpreting dreams that none could understand, standing firm in the face of life-threatening decrees, and delivering messages of hope and prophecy to kings and nations. But the food test also reminds us of a more personal truth. God honors our choices, even the small ones. Choosing integrity over convenience, obedience over compromise, and faith over fear builds character in ways that wealth, power, or status never can. Daniel's strength came not from political training or intellectual knowledge alone, but from the quiet, consistent decisions to honor God in every aspect of his life. The bond between Daniel and his friends grew stronger during this period. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah stood beside him, sharing in the discipline, supporting one another, and inspiring each other to remain faithful. Their story shows the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who uplift, encourage, and share our values. Even in a foreign land, with everything against them, they created a small circle of faith, courage, and integrity. And the results were undeniable. The king's officials recognized Daniel's wisdom and discernment. His appearance, strength, and intellect surpassed expectations. Even the king himself would later marvel at Daniel's understanding, not realizing that it came from a God who works quietly in the hearts of those who remain faithful. Here, we also see a pattern that would define Daniel's life. Trials are opportunities. What could have been a simple survival tactic, a diet choice, became a testimony of God's provision and a stepping stone toward a life of extraordinary influence. Every challenge Daniel faced was transformed into a platform for demonstrating God's power and faithfulness. My friend, think about how often we face small tests in life, moments where our patience, integrity, or faith are quietly challenged. Like Daniel, we have a choice: follow the crowd or stand firm in what we know is right. The outcomes may seem insignificant at first, but these decisions shape our character, prepare us for greater responsibilities, and allow God's presence to shine through our lives. The lesson from Daniel's food test extends beyond diet. It's about discipline, focus, and trusting God in every circumstance. It's about choosing God's path, even when the world offers comfort, pleasure, or convenience. And it's about the quiet, steadfast courage to do what's right, knowing that God sees, honors, and strengthens those who remain faithful. Years later, Daniel's early choices would echo through his life. His integrity and wisdom opened doors in the Babylonian court. He became a trusted advisor, a prophet, and a figure through whom God revealed visions and messages of hope, judgment, and future redemption. But all of it began with a simple act: choosing vegetables over the king's feast, trusting God in a small but significant way. This story reminds us that faithfulness is cultivated in small moments. Daniel didn't need to perform miracles to prove himself. He needed to make everyday choices that honored God. And when we do the same, remaining faithful in the small, unseen areas of life, we prepare ourselves for the extraordinary. So, as we reflect on Daniel and the king's food test, remember this: courage is often quiet, integrity is often invisible, and faithfulness in small things sets the stage for life-changing purposes. Daniel's life was a testament to God's guidance, care, and faithfulness, and his story encourages us to stand firm, even when the world expects us to conform. In the end, my friend, the boy who trusted God with a simple meal would grow into the man who interpreted kings' dreams, faced lions without fear, and revealed visions of the end times. His story teaches us that God honors courage, protects the faithful, and uses even the smallest acts of obedience to shape destiny. King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, vivid, mysterious, and troubling. It haunted him, yet he could not remember its details. What made it even more frightening was the king's belief that if someone could not interpret it, their life could be forfeit. The king demanded not only understanding but accuracy, and he demanded it immediately. Here is where Daniel's extraordinary faith and wisdom would shine. But let's pause to appreciate the stakes. For a young man in exile, interpreting a king's dream wasn't just about knowledge or skill. It was about courage, trust, and divine guidance. Daniel could have been intimidated, fearful, or even paralyzed by the enormity of the task. Yet he turned first to God, the source of all wisdom, the one who knows the secrets of the heart and the mysteries of the future. Daniel didn't rely on his intellect alone. He prayed fervently, seeking insight and understanding. And God, who honors faith and humility, revealed the dream and its meaning. This moment is powerful because it shows us that true wisdom is never self-generated. It comes from dependence on God, from seeking guidance beyond ourselves. Armed with this divine understanding, Daniel approached the king with confidence and humility. He didn't boast of his own abilities. He made it clear that the revelation came from God. And then he described the dream. Nebuchadnezzar had seen a massive statue with a head of gold, chest of silver, belly of bronze, legs of iron, and feet mixed with iron and clay. Daniel explained that these metals represented successive kingdoms, each with its rise and fall, and that ultimately, God's eternal kingdom would triumph over all earthly powers. You can imagine the king's reaction: awe, wonder, perhaps even fear mixed with relief. This interpretation was not only accurate, but profoundly spiritual. It revealed the transient nature of human power and the unshakable sovereignty of God. Daniel's words carried weight because they were backed by divine insight, and the king recognized the wisdom that could only come from a higher source. But there's more to this story than prophecy or interpretation. Notice Daniel's approach. He didn't scold the king, argue, or demand recognition. He presented the truth respectfully, with clarity and humility. His courage was not loud or dramatic. It was calm, thoughtful, and rooted in faith. And this, my friend, is a lesson for all of us. The power of God's wisdom often shines brightest when paired with humility and integrity. The dream itself was a profound message, not just for the king, but for all who would hear it. It reminded the world that human kingdoms rise and fall, that power is fleeting, and that true security comes from trusting in God's eternal plan. Daniel, a young man from a captured nation, became the vessel through which this truth was revealed, a testament to what faith, courage, and divine guidance can accomplish. Daniel's success in interpreting the dream also set the stage for his growing influence. The king elevated him to a high position, giving him authority and recognition in the Babylonian court. But Daniel never let these honors change him. He remained faithful, humble, and devoted to God. And through him, we see a recurring theme. When we remain steadfast in faith, God can use us to make a profound impact, even in environments that seem hostile or overwhelming. Think about the courage it took to stand before a powerful king and deliver a message that, in another context, could have led to danger. Daniel's trust in God gave him boldness, clarity, and wisdom. His example reminds us that when we face daunting challenges, prayer, reflection, and reliance on God provide the strength we need to act decisively and rightly. The story also reveals Daniel's strategic wisdom. He understood the importance of timing, tone, and respect. He could have flaunted his divine insight, but instead, he communicated it with care, ensuring that the message would be received. This balance of faith, wisdom, and tact is a hallmark of his character, and a guide for anyone seeking to navigate complex or high-stakes situations in life. As the king reflected on the dream and its interpretation, Daniel's influence continued to grow. But more importantly, the people around him, his friends, the officials, the other captives, saw a living example of faith and courage. Daniel's life was a testimony that God's wisdom is available to those who seek it, that even the most challenging situations can become opportunities to glorify God, and that obedience and integrity are always rewarded in the long term. Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream is more than a historical or prophetic account. It's a story of faith under pressure, of divine wisdom guiding human action, and of integrity shining in a world that often values power over principle. It's a reminder that God can reveal answers to those who earnestly seek Him, even in circumstances that seem impossible. And so, my friend, as we reflect on this story, think about the moments in your own life where clarity seems impossible, where decisions feel overwhelming, and where the stakes feel high. Like Daniel, we are invited to seek wisdom from God, to act with courage and humility, and to trust that He will guide our steps. When we do, even the most daunting challenges can become testimonies of faith and vessels for divine purpose. Daniel's life shows us that true influence comes not from wealth, power, or position alone, but from a heart that seeks God first, a spirit that remains faithful under pressure, and a courage that is grounded in truth. The young man who once faced exile, who chose vegetables over the king's feast, now stands before a king with insight that changes history. And through this story, we learn that God's wisdom, courage, and faithfulness are accessible to all who seek Him. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, had built a massive golden statue, gleaming in the sun, meant to symbolize his power and demand honor from all his subjects. His command was clear: everyone must bow and worship the statue, or face a dire consequence. It was a test of loyalty, obedience, and courage, and for Daniel's friends, it became a moment that would define their legacy. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah refused to bow. They could not, for their faith in the one true God demanded allegiance that no earthly king could override. Imagine the tension in that moment, the fear that must have coursed through their veins, the weight of knowing that their choice could lead to death. Yet they chose faith over fear, integrity over compromise, obedience to God over the orders of a powerful ruler. Their defiance did not go unnoticed. Officials rushed to Nebuchadnezzar, accusing the young men of rebellion. The king, enraged, confronted them. The situation was dire. Death by fire was not only a punishment, it was a spectacle, a warning to all who might resist the king's authority. But Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah stood unshaken. They boldly declared, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve can deliver us from it. But even if he does not, know this, we will not serve your gods or worship the image you have set up." Pause and feel the courage here. These were young men, exiles, far from home, facing the most terrifying of punishments, and yet they chose faith over survival. Their words remind us that true faith is not dependent on outcomes. It is rooted in trust, conviction, and the knowledge that God's presence transcends life's trials. Nebuchadnezzar, in his fury, ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. The fire blazed like an uncontrollable storm, threatening to consume anyone thrown inside. The king's guards dragged the 3 young men into the flames, and the furnace roared with heat. The palace trembled, and all who watched expected the worst. But then, something extraordinary happened. Amid the flames, the king saw not 3, but 4 figures walking unharmed. The 4th, he realized, had a radiant presence, like a divine being protecting them. The sight astonished Nebuchadnezzar. The fire, meant to destroy, had become a witness to God's power and protection. Daniel's friends emerged from the furnace untouched. Their hair was unburned, their clothes unscathed, and not a trace of smoke clung to them. The king was overwhelmed, awed by the God who had delivered these faithful men. He proclaimed, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel to rescue his servants." This story is not just about miraculous deliverance. It is about unwavering faith in the face of extreme adversity. It teaches us that standing for what is right often comes with immense pressure, but God honors courage and steadfast trust. Even when the outcome seems uncertain, faith can turn the impossible into a testament of God's glory. Notice the humility of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They didn't boast about their deliverance. They didn't claim credit. Their focus was always on God, on his power and mercy, rather than on their own bravery. This humility makes their story even more compelling. Faith is strongest when it is not about self, but about God's sovereignty. The fiery furnace also reveals a profound truth about God's presence. In moments of trial, fear, and uncertainty, God walks with us. We may feel alone, overwhelmed, or powerless, yet his presence is real, unseen yet powerful, turning threats into opportunities to reveal his glory. For Daniel's friends, the furnace could have been the end, but it became a testimony of divine protection and unwavering faith. This story has echoes for all of us. How often do we face challenges that feel impossible? Moments where doing the right thing seems risky, lonely, or even dangerous. Like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, we are called to hold firm, to trust God's power and presence, even when circumstances seem overwhelming. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is trusting God despite it. And what about Daniel, who watched and supported his friends through this trial? His steadfastness in faith, his guidance, and his own prayerful life created a foundation that empowered them to stand strong. Faithful communities, friends who encourage each other in courage and devotion, can make an incredible difference in moments of trial. Nebuchadnezzar's reaction after the deliverance is also meaningful. The king recognized the God of Israel, not as a distant deity, but as a living, active, protective force. God's faithfulness in dramatic, visible ways can change hearts, even in those who seem far from faith. Miracles are not just about awe, they are invitations for others to witness God's power and mercy. The story of the fiery furnace is timeless. It reminds us that faith is active, courageous, and unwavering. That trust in God is not a guarantee of comfort, but it is a guarantee of his presence. That choice is rooted in integrity, even in the face of death. Honor God and inspire generations. And as the story closes, remember this: the young men from Judah, far from home, exiled, and facing the ultimate trial, emerged victorious, not by power, not by strategy, but by faith. The fire that threatened to destroy them revealed the glory of God, strengthened their courage, and left a lasting legacy. Nebuchadnezzar's pride had reached a peak. He looked upon his kingdom and said, "Is this not the great Babylon I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" These words, proud and defiant, reveal a heart far from God. In that moment, the king could not see that his power was temporary, that all kingdoms rise and fall according to God's plan. God, in his mercy, chose to teach Nebuchadnezzar a lesson that would humble him and open his heart. Overnight, the king's mind changed. He was driven away from people, living among the animals, eating grass like an ox, and experiencing the humbling power of God firsthand. Imagine the confusion, the fear, and the realization that life as he knew it had vanished. It is here that Daniel's wisdom comes to the forefront. The prophet, already known for interpreting dreams and providing guidance, stood ready to counsel and support. Daniel's role wasn't just to deliver messages from God. It was to guide the king through understanding, to point toward repentance and transformation, and to show how humility before God brings restoration. When Nebuchadnezzar's mind was restored after this humbling period, he acknowledged God's sovereignty. He declared, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." This moment is remarkable, my friend, because it shows the power of God's lessons. Even the most proud, powerful people can be transformed when confronted with divine truth. Daniel's counsel throughout this period is also a lesson in patience, wisdom, and courage. He did not speak to humiliate the king. He did not seek glory for himself. Instead, he offered insight with respect, gently guiding the king toward understanding, helping him see beyond his pride to the eternal truth of God's power. We see here a recurring theme in Daniel's life. Courage and integrity are not only for facing danger, they are also for speaking truth to power. Daniel's counsel required discernment, tact, and faith, because a misstep could have had consequences for both him and the king. Yet his unwavering devotion to God gave him clarity and boldness. Nebuchadnezzar's transformation also had ripple effects across the kingdom. His acknowledgement of God's sovereignty influenced officials, citizens, and even neighboring nations. One man's humility and repentance created an environment where God's power could be recognized and honored. Daniel's role was crucial in this process, showing that faithful counsel and integrity can guide even the most powerful toward righteousness. This story is more than a historical account. It is a profound lesson for all of us. Pride can blind us, even when we are successful, talented, or powerful. Yet God's guidance, sometimes through humbling circumstances, can lead us to transformation, humility, and a deeper understanding of His sovereignty. And those who are wise, faithful, and courageous, like Daniel, can help illuminate this path. Think of your own life for a moment. How often do we let pride, ambition, or self-reliance cloud our judgment? How often do we forget that true strength comes from humility and dependence on God? Daniel's example shows us that courage is not only in standing firm under threat, but also in guiding others toward truth, even when it is uncomfortable or risky. Nebuchadnezzar's story also reminds us of God's patience and mercy. The king could have been left in pride, facing judgment without restoration. But God, in His loving wisdom, provided a pathway for learning, repentance, and acknowledgement of His eternal power. Daniel became the instrument through which this lesson was communicated, a testament to the importance of faithful servants in God's plan. As we reflect on this story, consider the qualities that defined Daniel: integrity, courage, wisdom, and humility. He was not seeking power or recognition, yet his influence shaped kings, nations, and history. He lived faithfully, even in exile, and his faithfulness prepared him to counsel rulers in moments that would determine not only their personal paths, but the course of entire kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar's transformation was more than personal, it was symbolic. It reminds us that no human power is absolute, that humility before God is essential, and that divine wisdom can transform even the proudest hearts. Daniel's counsel, grounded in faith and insight, exemplifies how God uses faithful servants to guide, teach, and lead others toward truth. And so, my friend, as we think about Nebuchadnezzar's journey from pride to humility, we see a powerful truth. God's ways are higher than ours. His lessons often come in unexpected forms, and he uses those who are faithful and wise to bring understanding, transformation, and glory to his name. Daniel's life continues to inspire, showing us that integrity, faith, and courage are not just virtues. They are instruments for God's work in the world. The king who once saw only his own glory now praises God. The exile-turned prophet who trusted in small acts of faith now guides a mighty ruler toward truth. And the lesson for us is clear. No matter our position, our challenges, or the pressures we face, God honors those who are faithful, and he uses their courage, wisdom, and integrity to shape destinies beyond imagination. By this time, Daniel had risen to prominence in the Babylonian Empire. He was an advisor to King Darius, whose reign was marked by reform and administrative organization. Daniel's exceptional qualities made him highly respected, but they also stirred envy among other officials. Jealous of his position and influence, these men conspired to find a way to bring him down. They knew that Daniel's devotion to God was steadfast. He prayed openly, 3 times a day, giving thanks and seeking guidance. The conspirators realized that if they could make a law that forced Daniel to disobey his God, they could eliminate him without risking the king's wrath. And so, they approached King Darius, flattering him and convincing him to issue a decree. Anyone who prayed to any god or man except the king for 30 days would be thrown into the den of lions. Think about the pressure Daniel must have felt. The law was sealed. Even the king could not revoke it. To disobey would be to betray God. To comply would be to compromise his faith. Yet, as always, Daniel's response was remarkable. He returned to his home, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and prayed as he always had, giving thanks to God. There was no hesitation, no secret plotting, no fear-driven compromise, only steadfast faith and courage. The conspirators, satisfied that Daniel had broken the law, rushed to the king and demanded justice. Darius was distressed. He admired Daniel greatly, and he had grown fond of him as a man of integrity. But the law of the Medes and Persians was unchangeable. With a heavy heart, Darius gave the order. Daniel must be cast into the den of lions. The den was dark, damp, and filled with ferocious lions, beasts trained to obey the king's commands and ready to devour any human placed before them. As Daniel was lowered into the pit, the conspirators gnashed their teeth in triumph, confident that their plan would succeed. Yet Daniel's heart remained calm. He trusted in God, whose power and protection far exceeded the might of lions or the schemes of men. That night, King Darius could not sleep. His mind kept returning to Daniel, and worry gnawed at his heart. As dawn broke, he hurried to the lion's den and called out with urgency and fear, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to save you from the lions?" To the king's astonishment, a voice answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, and I have done no wrong before you. O king." Imagine Darius's relief, awe, and gratitude. The king immediately ordered Daniel lifted from the den, unharmed. Every bone, every muscle, every inch of Daniel's being was preserved. The faithful prayer and steadfast devotion of one man had overcome an army of jealous officials and the ferocity of wild beasts. The conspirators, who had orchestrated this cruel plot, were themselves thrown into the lion's den, and the lions overpowered them immediately. Justice was served, and God's glory was revealed in a dramatic, unmistakable way. King Darius issued a decree to the entire kingdom, praising the God of Daniel as the living God who endures forever, rescues and saves, and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. This story is more than a tale of survival. It is a testament to the power of unwavering faith. Daniel's courage was not reckless. It was rooted in complete trust in God's protection and justice. He faced a life-threatening trial without compromising his beliefs, teaching us a timeless lesson. True faith is fearless, consistent, and unshaken even when the stakes are life and death. Notice the layers of this story. Daniel's devotion inspired a king to acknowledge God publicly. It demonstrated to all who witnessed it that God's power is supreme, capable of defying natural law and human schemes. And it served as a warning. Envy, deceit, and plotting against God's faithful servants ultimately lead to destruction. Daniel's life in the lion's den also illustrates the importance of consistency in faith. He did not pray only when it was safe or convenient. He prayed because it was his practice, his identity, and his devotion. Faithfulness in the small and ordinary acts of life prepares us for the extraordinary tests, just as his early obedience in Babylon's palace had prepared him for this trial. Moreover, Daniel's courage highlights the strength of prayer. Prayer was not just a ritual, it was a lifeline, a source of courage, wisdom, and divine intervention. When he faced the lions, Daniel's first action was to continue seeking God, not to strategize or negotiate. His trust was active, lived out, and unshakable. We also learn about God's faithfulness through Daniel's experience. Protection and deliverance are not about human power, cleverness, or avoidance of danger. They are about being aligned with God's will, acting with integrity, and trusting Him fully. Daniel's example assures us that God sees our faithfulness and intervenes in ways that demonstrate His glory and justice. Finally, Daniel in the lion's den teaches us about courage under pressure. Life often places us in dens of fear, challenge, and uncertainty. These may not be literal lions, but they are equally daunting. Situations at work, family crises, societal pressures, or moral dilemmas. Daniel's example shows that courage and faith are cultivated by consistent devotion, integrity, and prayer, and that these qualities can turn moments of potential defeat into testimonies of God's power. As we reflect on this story, my friend, remember this. Fear may roar like the lions, schemes may plot against us, and challenges may seem insurmountable. Yet, like Daniel, when we stand firm in faith, trust God completely, and act with integrity, we can face the fiercest trials without fear. Our faithfulness becomes a beacon of hope, a testament to God's enduring power, and a witness that inspires others to trust and follow Him. Daniel's experience in the lion's den is a story of courage, unwavering devotion, and divine intervention. It is a timeless reminder that God honors the faithful, protects the innocent, and demonstrates His power in ways that defy human expectation. The man who faced the jaws of lions emerged stronger, a living example of what it means to trust God completely, and a beacon of hope for generations to come. The vision came to Daniel in a moment of prayer and reflection, a quiet time where his mind was attuned to God's wisdom. In this vision, he saw a great statue, awe-inspiring yet terrifying, each part made of a different material, a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron mixed with clay. Each metal represented a kingdom, each one rising and falling according to God's plan. The head of gold was Babylon, mighty and glorious, where Daniel himself served. Its splendor reflected the king's authority and wealth, but Daniel knew it was transient, destined to be succeeded by lesser kingdoms. And indeed, history confirmed it. Babylon fell, as all earthly empires eventually do, reminding us that human power is temporary, no matter how vast or seemingly eternal. The silver chest and arms symbolized the Medo-Persian Empire, a kingdom of strength, yet not as glorious as Babylon. Then came the bronze belly and thighs, representing Greece, whose influence spread rapidly, shaping culture, philosophy, and warfare. Finally, the iron legs symbolized Rome, a powerful and relentless empire, capable of conquest, but still under God's sovereign watch. The feet, partly of iron and partly of clay, foretold divided kingdoms, fragile yet dangerous, a reflection of human compromise and instability. Through this vision, Daniel understood a profound truth. All earthly kingdoms, no matter how powerful, operate under God's sovereignty. History unfolds according to his plan, not human ambition. And while kings rise and fall, God's kingdom is eternal, unshakable, and beyond the reach of time or decay. But the vision wasn't just about kingdoms. It was about hope and assurance for God's people. Daniel, a captive in a foreign land, could see that God's hand was at work in the unfolding of history. The trials, the exiles, the oppressive rulers, all were part of a larger tapestry that pointed toward God's ultimate plan. For Daniel, this vision was both reassurance and a call to faithfulness. Daniel also saw a stone, small and seemingly insignificant, striking the statue and shattering it completely. This stone, he understood, represented God's eternal kingdom, a divine rule that would never be destroyed, encompassing all nations and filled with righteousness. It is a reminder that even when human power seems overwhelming, God's plan is unstoppable, his authority supreme, and his kingdom eternal. This prophecy carries a timeless message. For us today, it reminds us that the world's powers, systems, and authorities are temporary. Wealth, prestige, and control may appear dominant, but they are fleeting compared to the eternal rule of God. Daniel's vision teaches patience, trust, and hope. No matter how chaotic or unjust the world may seem, God's plan is unfolding, and his kingdom will endure. Think about Daniel in this moment, a man in exile, surrounded by foreign rulers, yet receiving insights into the rise and fall of empires. His faith and devotion positioned him to understand what others could not. This reminds us that faithfulness, prayer, and a close relationship with God open doors to understanding, guidance, and wisdom far beyond human perception. Daniel's interpretation of the four kingdoms also served a practical purpose. It provided hope to the Jewish people in exile, assuring them that their suffering and displacement were not without purpose. God was still in control. The visions reinforced the truth that while human rulers wield temporary power, God's authority is unchanging, his promises sure, and his kingdom everlasting. The prophecy also highlights a principle that runs throughout Daniel's life. God's timing is perfect. Kingdoms rise and fall according to his plan, not according to human ambition. Daniel's insight reminds us that patience, faith, and trust in God's timing are essential, even when we cannot see the full picture. Sometimes, what seems like chaos is part of a divine design that only God can orchestrate. Moreover, Daniel's life demonstrates how God uses faithful servants to communicate his plans. His courage, integrity, and wisdom allowed him to interpret visions that others could not comprehend. Similarly, God often places us in positions where our faithfulness, perseverance, and discernment can impact others, reveal his glory, and fulfill his purposes. The Four Kingdoms prophecy also encourages resilience. Life may place us under rulers, systems, or situations that seem beyond our control. We may face injustice, oppression, or uncertainty, yet God's eternal kingdom provides hope, perspective, and assurance that all human authority is ultimately subordinate to him. Daniel's vision reminds us that even in exile, even under foreign dominion, God's plan is active and unfolding. As we reflect on this story, my friend, consider the message for our lives today. Just as Daniel saw the rise and fall of kingdoms, we too witness changes in society, culture, and leadership. These shifts may bring fear or uncertainty, yet Daniel's example encourages us to remain steadfast in faith, to trust God's sovereignty, and to live with integrity, knowing that he is ultimately in control. Daniel's vision of the four kingdoms is both a warning and a promise. It warns against pride, dependence on human power, and forgetting God's sovereignty. It promises that God's eternal kingdom will prevail, that his justice and righteousness endure, and that those who remain faithful will witness his plans unfold. Finally, this prophecy reinforces a central truth of Daniel's life. Faithfulness matters. Daniel's devotion, prayer, and integrity allowed him to understand God's vision and convey it with clarity. His life reminds us that our relationship with God equips us to navigate the complexities of life, to remain steadfast under pressure, and to participate in God's eternal plan. One night, Daniel received a vision, one that would reveal the rise and fall of empires and show God's control over history in a way that transcended human understanding. In his vision, he saw a ram, powerful and imposing, with 2 long horns. The ram pushed westward, northward, and southward, unstoppable and dominant. Its strength was awe-inspiring. Yet Daniel sensed that this animal symbolized more than mere brute power. It represented the Medo-Persian Empire, an empire destined to rise and conquer, guided, ultimately, by God's hand. As Daniel watched, a goat with a prominent horn appeared, rushing from the west with incredible speed. It struck the ram with force, breaking its horns and toppling it. The goat became exceedingly powerful, but its horn eventually shattered, and 4 smaller horns rose in its place. Daniel understood that the goat symbolized Greece under Alexander the Great, whose swift conquests reshaped the world. The 4 smaller horns represented the divided kingdoms that followed his death, each one powerful yet subordinate to God's ultimate plan. This vision was not merely historical, it was deeply spiritual and prophetic. It revealed the transient nature of human power, the rise and fall of empires, and the sovereignty of God over all nations. Daniel's insight into the vision came not from intellect alone but from prayer, faith, and a life devoted to God. He recognized that while kingdoms may rise and fall with violence and speed, God's eternal plan unfolds with precision, guiding history toward his divine purpose. The vision also held personal significance for Daniel. As a Jew in exile, he lived under foreign rulers and witnessed firsthand the tumult of empires. He had already experienced the Babylonian rise and fall, the Medo-Persian domination, and the initial stirrings of Greek power. This vision reassured him that God's sovereignty extended over all human authority, and that despite exile, oppression, and uncertainty, God's promises to his people remained intact. Consider the courage it took for Daniel to embrace this vision. To understand future events, empires, and conquests required humility, faith, and patience. The prophecy could be overwhelming, yet Daniel approached it with prayer, seeking wisdom and clarity. He knew that such revelations were not meant to terrify, but to equip, reassure, and guide God's people in times of uncertainty. The imagery of the ram and the goat also teaches us about the speed and unpredictability of life. Just as the goat struck swiftly and overtook the ram, circumstances can change rapidly in our own lives. Unexpected events, challenges, or opportunities may appear, yet the vision reminds us that God is in control, orchestrating outcomes beyond human comprehension. Moreover, the 4 horns emerging from the broken goat's horn symbolize the fragmentation of human power. Empires and leaders may rise with strength, but division and impermanence are inevitable. God's eternal plan, however, is not subject to human weakness, ambition, or division. This gives hope, especially in times of chaos, uncertainty, or personal trials. Daniel's response to the vision also provides a lesson for us. He did not react with fear or despair. He sought understanding, prayed for insight, and documented the revelation faithfully. Faithfulness in action, humility in seeking guidance, and courage in facing divine truths are hallmarks of a life aligned with God. Daniel reminds us that even when confronted with vast, overwhelming realities, our response can be one of trust, prayer, and obedience. The vision also underscores the importance of perspective. Human events may seem chaotic, unfair, or incomprehensible, yet God's sovereignty provides context and purpose. What may appear as random conquest or oppression is, in God's view, part of a larger, divine design. Daniel's ability to see through God's eyes allowed him to remain faithful, courageous, and patient, even in exile and uncertainty. Furthermore, the ram and goat vision points to the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom. Despite the rise and fall of empires, God's authority is eternal, unshaken, and powerful. Daniel's prophetic insight reassures us that all human endeavors, no matter how mighty, are subject to God's will. His sovereignty is constant, and his kingdom, though unseen, is unfolding according to divine wisdom. This story also illustrates the power of prayer and devotion. Daniel's understanding was revealed because he consistently sought God. He prayed in exile, he remained faithful under pressure, and he lived with integrity. Prayer was his lifeline, guiding him to insights that others could not comprehend. The vision shows that spiritual preparedness, devotion, and humility open doors to understanding divine mysteries. Finally, the vision of the ram and the goat is a call to hope and trust. Life is full of changes, uncertainty, and challenges, much like the rapid conquests and rise of kingdoms in Daniel's vision. Yet God's control is absolute. For Daniel, this was a reminder that God's people are never abandoned and that divine justice and purpose will prevail, even when human history appears chaotic or threatening. As we reflect on this vision, my friend, consider the lesson for our own lives. God's plans are always unfolding, even when we cannot see the full picture. Faith, prayer, and trust allow us to navigate life's uncertainties with courage and peace. Like Daniel, we can face change, challenge, and unpredictability with confidence, knowing that God's sovereignty governs all and that his eternal kingdom will ultimately prevail. Daniel's vision of the ram and the goat is more than prophecy. It is encouragement. It reassures the faithful that God's hand guides history, that he protects his people, and that even the mightiest powers are under his command. Daniel's life teaches us that understanding, wisdom, and courage are cultivated through faith, devotion, and unwavering trust in God. Daniel had been praying fervently, mourning the condition of Jerusalem and the exile of his people. He longed for restoration, for God's favor to shine upon his city, and for justice and peace to return. As he prayed, the angel Gabriel appeared, bringing clarity and revelation. Gabriel explained that 70 weeks, 70 periods of 7 years, were decreed for Daniel's people and the holy city. During this time, God's plan would unfold in precise stages, culminating in the ultimate redemption. The prophecy was both comforting and challenging. It revealed that restoration and deliverance were not immediate, yet they were certain. The first part of the 70 weeks included the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the restoration of the city and its temple, signaling hope for God's people in exile. Daniel saw that God's timing was perfect, even when human patience might falter. But Gabriel's message went further. He spoke of a future anointed one, a Messiah, who would come to bring salvation and righteousness. This was a revelation that stretched far beyond Daniel's lifetime, pointing to a plan that would extend across centuries. Imagine the weight of such knowledge, the anticipation, the awe, and the responsibility of being entrusted with divine truth. The prophecy also highlighted the reality of trials and suffering. There would be opposition, injustice, and the breaking of the city, yet these events were not beyond God's control. History would unfold according to his plan, and every challenge, every hardship, would serve a purpose in the grand design of redemption. Daniel's heart must have been both heavy and hopeful, understanding that God's justice and mercy would ultimately prevail. Think about the courage it took to receive and comprehend this revelation. Daniel did not flinch or question God's plan. He embraced it with faith, recording it faithfully for future generations. The prophecy shows us that understanding God's purposes requires patience, humility, and trust. Even when we cannot see the full picture, God's timing and wisdom are perfect. The 70 weeks also reveal God's meticulous attention to detail. Every period, every event, and every decree was ordained by him. Nothing in history is random. Nothing is outside God's sovereign plan. For Daniel, this was a source of reassurance. Despite exile, oppression, and uncertainty, God's purpose was unfolding exactly as he intended. Furthermore, the prophecy demonstrates God's mercy and desire for reconciliation. The coming of the Messiah, foretold in these 70 weeks, was a promise of salvation, hope, and restoration for all people. It reminds us that God's plans are rooted in love and that his timing ensures the fulfillment of his promises in the most perfect way. Daniel's role in receiving this prophecy is also significant. He was not merely a passive observer. He was a faithful servant, dedicated to prayer, humility, and obedience. His life prepared him to receive such profound revelation, showing us that devotion and faithfulness open the door to divine insight and understanding. The 70 weeks prophecy also offers a lesson for patience. God's plans often unfold over long periods, beyond human comprehension or expectation. We may not always see immediate results or answers, but Daniel's vision teaches us to trust in God's timing, knowing that he is orchestrating events according to his perfect wisdom. Moreover, the prophecy calls for vigilance and perseverance. Even as challenges and opposition arise, God's people are called to remain faithful, just as Daniel did. Prayer, obedience, and trust in God provide strength and clarity, allowing us to navigate uncertainty with confidence in his plan. This vision also inspires hope for the future. Despite suffering, exile, and human failures, God's plan is unwavering. The Messiah's coming, foretold in this prophecy, is a promise of redemption, restoration, and eternal peace. Daniel's faith and dedication ensured that this message would be preserved, guiding countless generations in understanding God's faithfulness. As we reflect on the 70 weeks, my friend, consider the lesson for our own lives. Life may feel long, uncertain, and filled with trials, but God's plan is always perfect. Faithfulness, prayer, and trust in him allow us to participate in his unfolding story. Daniel's example reminds us that patience, devotion, and humility prepare us to receive God's guidance, even when it stretches across decades or centuries. Daniel's vision of the 70 weeks is more than prophecy. It is hope. It reassures us that God's sovereignty governs all history, that his promises are reliable, and that redemption and salvation are certain through his divine plan. His life encourages us to remain faithful, to trust his timing, and to embrace his purpose with courage and hope. In the vision, Daniel saw a man clothed in dazzling light, a figure of majesty and authority whose presence alone commanded awe. His clothing shimmered like the sun, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. Daniel fell to the ground in fear, overwhelmed by the sheer glory and holiness of the being before him. Yet the glorious man spoke, bringing clarity, comfort, and profound revelation. The vision was complex and layered. Daniel saw times of distress, nations rising and falling, and struggles that would test God's people. The glorious man revealed that these trials, though daunting, were part of a divine timeline leading to the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom. He explained that even when humanity seemed lost in chaos, God's sovereign hand remained in control, orchestrating events with precision and purpose. This was no ordinary vision. It was both a warning and a promise. Daniel saw kingdoms weakened, conflicts erupting, and people enduring hardship, yet he also saw that God's plan for justice and redemption would prevail. It was a reminder that earthly struggles, no matter how severe, are temporary compared to God's eternal rule. The glorious man also provided insight into the end times. Daniel saw the culmination of human history when God's kingdom would triumph over all worldly powers. The vision revealed that the faithful would be vindicated, that justice would be served, and that God's mercy would be fully manifested. It was both terrifying and comforting, a vision of trials, yes, but also of ultimate hope and restoration. Daniel's response to this revelation was profound. He was human, filled with awe and fear, yet he absorbed the message with humility and faith. The vision required patience, understanding, and unwavering trust. Daniel's devotion allowed him to grasp the truth. God's timing, wisdom, and justice are perfect, even when human eyes cannot comprehend them. This vision is deeply relevant for all who seek to understand God's sovereignty. It teaches that life will bring challenges, opposition, and uncertainty, but God's plan is never derailed. The glorious man emphasized that those who remain faithful, who persevere in prayer, and who live with integrity will witness God's triumph and experience his protection and favor. The imagery of the glorious man also underscores God's majesty and holiness. Daniel's fear and reverence remind us that God's presence is overwhelming, yet comforting to those who trust him. Faith requires humility, a recognition that God's wisdom and plans surpass our understanding, and courage to follow him even in the midst of uncertainty. In the vision, Daniel also saw symbolic timelines and events, which many scholars interpret as relating to both immediate and distant futures. The details highlighted the precision of God's plan and the certainty of his promises. Even when human history seems chaotic, the divine narrative unfolds exactly as God intends. Daniel's understanding provides hope, showing that nothing is random and that God's kingdom will ultimately prevail. The vision also emphasizes perseverance. God's people, like Daniel, are called to remain steadfast, even when circumstances seem dire. Prayer, devotion, and faithfulness are essential tools to navigate the storms of life. Daniel's life demonstrates that consistent, humble faith opens the door to understanding, guidance, and divine insight. Furthermore, the vision reveals the interaction between divine justice and mercy. While the end times involve judgment, they also bring restoration, vindication, and hope for the faithful. The glorious man reassured Daniel that God's purposes are just and perfect, even when human suffering appears overwhelming. This dual message of warning and hope teaches patience, trust, and obedience. The vision of the glorious man also highlights the importance of understanding God's sovereignty. Human power, kingdoms, and authority are temporary. They rise and fall according to divine orchestration. Daniel's prophetic insight assures us that God's kingdom is eternal, and his justice and mercy will triumph over all worldly forces. As we reflect on this story, my friend, consider the lessons it offers. Life may bring trials, uncertainty, and challenges that seem impossible. Yet God's plan is unfailing. Faith, prayer, and devotion provide guidance and strength. Like Daniel, we can trust in God's timing, live with integrity, and remain steadfast in our commitment to him. Daniel's vision of the glorious man is ultimately a message of hope. It reassures the faithful that God's kingdom will prevail, that justice will be served, and that his mercy is everlasting. It calls us to courage, patience, and devotion, reminding us that even in the darkest times, God's light shines, guiding, protecting, and fulfilling his promises. Through this vision, Daniel's life continues to inspire. His unwavering faith, humility, and courage provide a blueprint for living in alignment with God's plan. The vision of the glorious man reminds us that God's power, presence, and justice are absolute, and that the faithful will witness his triumph in full.